We basically count the things that are on your network and tell you what it is in a nutshell. So it's a problem that a lot of companies have, big and small. They just don't know what they have on their IT network, in their on their OT network. So OT is operational technology. Could be things like power generation and utilities, or it could be we have a ton of manufacturing customers, so the manufacturing floors, those kind of things. Then cloud, and also since the pandemic, a lot more remote workers because they have assets too at home.
Welcome to Business Ninjas, brought to you by WriteForMe, where you'll hear from business leaders who are out there growing their business and slaying it every day. Learn from the masters. Let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of Business Ninjas. I'm here today with Chris Kirsch. He's the CEO and co-founder at runZero. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, excited to have you. So Chris, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Right. So I'm the CEO and co-founder, as you said, of a cybersecurity company. Founded that, my co-founder founded it in 2018. I joined in 2021. He had prototyped the software, and I came in when we were ready to scale the product, when product was solid. He had gotten some customers, product market fit was there, and he was ready to add sales and marketing. I myself have been in cybersecurity for over 25 years. Started out in Germany. You might be able to tell that from the accent. Then came over to the US, partially for an acquisition, partially for personal reasons, and been here ever since. Worked for a number of companies, Rapid7, very early on PGP, if some of the folks remember that, VeriCode more lately, and now runZero.
Interesting. So tell me more about runZero.
So we're a cyber asset management company. So that means we basically count the things that are on your network and tell you what it is in a nutshell. So it's a problem that a lot of companies have, big and small. They just don't know what they have on their IT network, in their on their OT network. So OT is operational technology. Could be things like power generation and utilities, or it could be we have a ton of manufacturing customers, so the manufacturing floors, those kind of things. Then cloud, and also since the pandemic, a lot more remote workers because they have assets too at home, IT assets.
Interesting. So you talked about joining runZero in 2021. Talk to me about, how did you know when it was time to scale the company?
It's always great to talk in retrospect about how I exactly knew that it was the right time. It was a little bit serendipity. My co-founder had built the company. I knew him from a previous life at Rapid7, and he'd built the product, and basically I was in my current job, in my then job at a different software company, and we'd gotten acquired 3 times while I was there, and I was ready for something new. So I texted him. I said, "Hey, I'm ready to take a page out of your book. I'm going to take 6 months off." And he texted back and said, "Hey, do you want to join here? Maybe do you want to be part of this company?" I said, "Yeah, maybe in 3 months. So I can take 3 months off." And so I did that. It was during the pandemic, so I couldn't go very far. So that's how I joined. But it was exactly at the right time, because I talked with him about this. When is the right time for me to join? And he had gotten quite a lot of customers. I think it was 90 at the time. He had quite respectable ARR, where he was already cash flow positive. He paid his founder loan back, all of that stuff. And it was just seemed like if we add sales and marketing and process and recruiting and all of that to the mix, we can actually scale this up pretty fast.
So talking about adding sales, adding marketing, what kind of profile of people did you hire to be successful?
Sure. So normally I would say, first of all, you need to figure out what function and what kind of, what functions do you need to fill first. Normally I would say you probably start out with product marketing. I have a product marketing background, so we didn't need that, right? For messaging positioning, you need to find the right message to resonate with customers. And my co-founder HD had done a ton of work on that already because people were already buying it. I could just ask them and so on, and so that was pretty clear. Normally, the next step is then to drum up business, and you can either do that with inbound marketing, so you hire marketing people to actually get inbound interest, or you have outbound sales, so BDR teams or AEs that do a lot of outbounding. We were in a very interesting situation because we didn't have any sales, we didn't have any marketing, but we had a ton of inbound leads. HD is quite well known through his previous project, which is Metasploit, which he sold to Rapid7. And so he had, I think it was like 92,000 Twitter followers, like 25,000 connections on LinkedIn. And so he had created a business just based on putting stuff out there on social media, no paid ads. He didn't even have a CRM. He had a website, right? It was very basic. Had a basic e-commerce store already, although most of the deals and a lot of the, most of the dollars we got in and still do today is from larger companies, enterprise deals, and almost all of it is through POs and not through credit card swipes. So my problem in the beginning was I had all of this inbound and I couldn't even manage it myself. I was like working 12, 14 hours just to respond to the inbound leads, right? And so I built a CRM because I knew like we needed a CRM if we wanted to survive and like scale up. One person without a CRM, barely doable. Once you add more salespeople to the mix, it gets really tricky. So I brought on HubSpot first, got all of the historical data into HubSpot. That was quite a bit of work. And then I started hiring salespeople, first a mid-market rep, and then very shortly after an enterprise rep. I knew I needed both. We were getting more interest from enterprise deals, also take more handholding. And I was looking for people that had seen small companies before, were very early in, right? Because it's very different. If you have a salesperson who is coming from a very big company, they come in and they go through this 2-week onboarding program where they have to take videos and courses and quizzes and all of that stuff, versus somebody who has been in a startup before, very scrappy, listening to the customer, developing a pitch. We start out with a pitch that I kind of train them on, but then kind of iterating on that and testing things out, providing feedback and so on. So you need that kind of a profile for an early stage startup. Normally, very early stage, the founders are usually the salespeople, right? They know the product the best. They should know the market and their ICP the best, their buyer personas. But as you're adding other salespeople, look for that kind of a profile.
Interesting. That's great advice too, because this is my first position in a startup, and you're 100% right about being kind of like working it from the ground up and putting in those hours. And one of the things that's so important is kind of establishing those, cultural values. And I'm curious your thoughts on, like, from the startup world, kind of how those were developed and why was it important for runZero?
So the cultural values, we were at about 15 people, I think, when we said like, hey, we really don't want to lose the culture that we have. And I heard a lot of people from inside the company said like, hey, I really want to make sure we keep the culture. I said, that's great. I agree. How do you define the culture?
Yes,
right?
I was just about to, yeah.
Right. And then when we recruit, because I think it was around that time, maybe a little bit later, I think at about 20, 25 people, we started adding internal recruiters. In the screening process, you need to have certain benchmarks of what you think the cultural values are and your culture is, so that you can screen candidates against that, right? And so I sat down in a room with a few people. I think it was like 5, 6 people. A virtual room because we're fully remote, right? And we did 3 sessions. First 2 sessions was me asking questions. I was asking them, hey, why did you join runZero? Why did you what do you like about the culture here? What did you like about the culture at previous companies that could apply here? What companies do you like to buy from because of their culture? Those kind of things. And so we had very meaty discussions. I think it was a total of 4 hours of discussions, and I took really detailed notes. And then I synthesized all of those notes into one page that's on our website today. And those are like 5 different values. I should know them like the back of my hand, but I'm probably going to fail right now. That's things like being kind and fair, being transparent, being customer focused, those kind of things. And then there are sub bullets under that explain a little bit on like, what does that mean? And so on. We chose that route of getting people in a room. And by the way, my co-founder was not in the room because he said, hey, Chris, you and I agree on all of this stuff anyway. Put somebody else in my seat. Makes more sense. And so we wanted to have a diverse set of voices. So we had all different ages, cultural backgrounds, departments, seniorities, all of those things, and brought those in. And I was floored with how much people had thought about culture and how thoughtful their answers were.
Wow.
Because I can, people always say, oh, I like the culture here. And that's can be kind of a throwaway comment, right? Because like, I feel, I like being here. But I was floored at how deeply people had thought about that.
Yeah.
And so that was really eye-opening, and I learned a ton in those sessions.
Yeah, very interesting. And why do you think it was important to be able to really take a deep dive at the ground level?
Because I didn't want to dictate a culture from the pulpit. So I had been in other companies where the cultural values were kind of like, I knew they were there because they were on the wall of the meeting room. And, sometimes we talked about them, and often cultures also lived those values, but I'd never been in the room when they were created. And I thought that if HD and I just sit down and, come up with something that we think is good, is that really the living culture? I wanted to, if what we were doing today was working, I wanted to first understand what is it and why is it working? And not just assume that I know already.
Yeah. Interesting. Good point. So how did you know you were on the right path to success with runZero?
Deals. You close deals and you increase ARR, right? So first year, I think we 5x'd the company in terms of ARR. Second year, I mean, the past year was tough, I think, for everybody, but we still roughly doubled the company in terms of revenue.
Wow.
And that was in a really tough economic environment, right? So I think I'm still very proud of that. And so we'll see what next year brings. We're in the financial planning for that right now.
That's fantastic. So kind of talking about your clients and your ideal client profile, like you said, kind of identifying that's important. Are there trends that you see runZero working with, specific industries, verticals, client personas? Talk to me a little bit about that.
So we're quite, so we sell into security teams mostly. The security teams are the ones that really suffer when the inventory isn't working, especially when the inventory isn't accurate for unmanaged devices, IoT, OT, like all the stuff that can get hacked and compromised, and they have to clean it up, right? The IT team, they also find it important, but they're not as driven by that, because they care more about the managed devices, because they're those are the devices that they're responsible for. They're not responsible for the unmanaged ones. In terms of industries, we are in a bunch of different industries. So SLED, so that's state, local, and education, for those not familiar with that acronym. Retail, manufacturing, technology companies, so some big like software and tech companies out there. Telecom, hosting and cloud companies, electronics manufacturers, healthcare, media, federal government, utilities, those kind of things. So it's really quite broad.
Yeah.
And we, in most companies I've been in, there is like a sweet spot of like, this is great for small companies, this is great for big companies. strangely, we span that gamut. We have a free version that people can use at home. And it's usually like, tech enthusiasts and so on who try it out on their home network.
Mm-hmm.
And then that goes up to 256 devices on the network.
Okay.
And then we go up to, I don't know, 1 million plus devices on the bigger networks with biggest companies like in the Fortune 10. So but they're using it in a different way, right? So somebody who's working for a smaller company, maybe like 50 or 100 people, they might use runZero exclusively. The bigger companies usually have a system of record. They just don't have the right data in it. So it's typically called a CMDB, configuration management database. Just means like where you store a database where you store your IT asset inventory. And so those companies typically feed the data from our scans and API integrations into their CMDB. So ServiceNow, for example, is a good example for a CMDB that's used quite a lot.
Interesting. So there are, other cyber asset management companies out there. Talk to me about what differentiates runZero from others.
Yeah. So HD and I both have a security background for, 20, 25 years. And his background is very specific. He's an ethical hacker. So he developed a leading solution called Metasploit that so-called penetration testers use to hack networks in the good sense. They get, these penetration testers get hired by companies to simulate an attack on their network. So what you do in that is you first of all, you need to find out what belongs to the network. Just count the assets. Second part is fingerprint the assets, figure out what they are, then exploit the assets, which means getting in, right? That's the quote unquote hacking part. And then post-exploitation, which means taking control of the device, grabbing data and downloading it from the device, uploading malware to the device, all of that stuff. And so the first two steps of that process, counting the devices on the network and telling me what they are, that's pretty much the same thing as asset inventory, like discovery for asset inventory. So he used those techniques, not the same software. He wrote new software from scratch that is purpose-built for that purpose, but he used a lot of the techniques that he learned over decades, right? And he built them into an IT asset discovery product that now does a ton more, right? And when you compare that to some of the other solutions out there that try to either log on to the machine that they're inventorying or try to install a piece of software on the machine that they're inventorying, that only works if you already manage and control that device. If it's like, okay, it's a Windows server that I know about, that I control, I can log onto it, I can install a piece of software, great. But the problem is that now you're only counting what you already know about. And if you're thinking about the random machine that a developer set up in the corner or somewhere in the cloud, or an IP phone, a thermostat, and a security camera, all of that stuff, you can't install a piece of software on that. You don't, your Windows logon doesn't work on those. And it's a real problem for companies of all sizes. So I'll give you an example. This is top of mind because it's a deal we just closed this month. This is a big theme park, like rides, those kind of things. And they were testing out our product, and they saw in a different product that they were already using for security monitoring, they saw that a device on their network was reaching out to an IP address somewhere in China that was known to be run by malicious attackers, right?
Yeah.
And so they were like, what the hell is this? So, right? And none of their tools could tell them. And they were, they had the internal IP address, but they couldn't figure out what it is and where it was.
Yeah.
So they plugged in the IP address into our solution. We told them, hey, this is a security camera from this specific vendor. It's connected here on the network. They were like, bingo, all right, we're disconnecting that thing and throwing that in the dumpster, right? Because that thing's compromised and don't want to have that on our network. Next question was, do we have more of these things, and where are they? Right. So now they can go into the database and just say like, hey, give me all of the equipment from this vendor with this make and model, or with certain, whatever they determined was like the thing that they were looking for.
Yeah.
And it popped out, 40 other devices that they also had a look at and,
really
screened and threw out or hardened or whatever. Right. So knowing what you have on the network and being able to find things and to look for things that are like the other things that just got compromised, or even just looking at things to make sure that you get ahead of problems before they occur, that requires really good asset inventory.
Wow. What would you say the biggest misconception about asset management and asset inventory or cybersecurity would be?
It's a very broad question. So biggest misconception about asset inventory is I think you can get to a ton more accuracy. You can never be 100% accurate, because sometimes customers don't even agree internally on how something should be counted. Like, what's a good example? Like, let's say you have, I think they're called switch stacks. So a switch is, like a device where you plug in different devices and it helps with, it's a networking device. And to scale these, you can put several of these boxes on top of each other and connect them in the way where you could argue it's 10 devices or it's one device. Right? So so those kind of things. Or sometimes you have there's just lots of edge cases where like how you count things or how you portray something is debatable. Overall, I think when people use our product, they're usually very happy with what they perceive as accurate, complete, detailed data. And in cybersecurity, I think a lot of people think that it's that everybody's getting attacked by the super advanced nation state actors out of Russia and China, like the hackers that sit in a bunker somewhere funded by the government in a big team and so on. And that's true for some. But if you want to secure your data and your network, start with the basics. So I'll give you some tips that have nothing to do with what I sell, but just things that maybe I'll even start with securing your private life. I think the best thing you can do to start with cybersecurity / identity fraud is freeze your credit. It's nothing to do with a computer, right? But some of the things that could leak about you online from yourself or from third parties can be used to steal your identity, and the biggest impact to you is if somebody steals all of your money, that's bad. If somebody borrows 3 times that amount under your name, under your identity, that's worse. So I would say freeze your credit, right? Okay. And then there are other things like use a password manager, don't reuse passwords, use multi-factor authentication. So that's the little code that you need to, that's super annoying that you get by text message or, on your phone, need to type in. It's annoying. Trust me, it is really important that you do this. So those would be my top 3 tips. I also wrote a blog post about it's like 12, 13 tips or something. Yeah. For private individuals to protect themselves. It's up on Medium. So if you search for Medium, Kirsch, protecting against identity theft or something like that, you should be able to find it pretty quick.
Yeah. So if people want to check out other blogs that you've written, where would they go to find that and learn more about runZero as well?
Sure. So runZero.com is the company. I write a fair amount of blog posts there. I have written a few blog posts about cultural, like the cultural values one I think is coming out in a week. I've written one about transparency, about being kind and fair at work and how that makes sense from a business perspective too, and how it builds a better culture. So there's technical content there. There's other content, you can find me on Medium. I've written a few blog posts there, mix of marketing and security. And you can find me on LinkedIn and then also on Mastodon on infosec.exchange. My handle is Chris_Kirsch.
Lovely. Awesome. Well, Chris, as we wrap up this conversation, is there anything that you want to leave our listeners with?
I think a lot of your listeners are founders, right? Founders and people running companies or founding members in companies. I would say build a product, try to get to product market fit before you start scaling, because I still see a lot of companies that build sales and marketing departments before they even have the product ready. And I think that's super risky. Yeah. And you're not setting up your sales or marketing for success. Get somebody who's familiar with product marketing so that you can work on the messaging and start pitching as a founder. And then once you think you have unlocked something that really resonates broadly and you can do that in a repeatable way, then think about scaling up.
That's fantastic. Well, Chris, this has been a really interesting conversation. I learned a lot about cybersecurity and a lot about cyber asset management. I appreciate you taking the time to be on Business Ninjas today.
Thank you very much.